Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On tonight's feature presentation, we'll discuss the history of Sasquatch. Now, Sasquatch has captivated the human mind like no other creature has before, save maybe the dragon. However, Sasquatch has been spoofed by advertisements depicting the creature in a rather ridiculously hilarious manner. Horror films. And then there are the tabloids, the aggravating tabloids. There's the comic book superhero as well, but he doesn't really do anything bad for the creature. And to be specific, this all seems to have started after the year 1969, when Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin claimed to have shot that infamous piece of footage of the Sasquatch walking across. And the interesting thing to point out is, at the time, yes, Roger Patterson was a gifted artist when he was making things, but it's worth noticing that this creature has breasts, female breasts, which at the time would have been really hard to fake on a costume. Yes, at the time, well, I should say about the time, the Planet of the Apes was coming out. And I've never seen that movie, but I imagine they have female ape men in there. Yet, it's still rather difficult, even with all the proper equipment. And Roger Patterson would not have had access to that. That little bit of controversy aside. So, we're going to discuss the history prior to Roger Patterson. One of the major reasons for it, other than all the social distortion, is sightings went through the roof after that. Some people claim that it's due to this film having an effect on the public mindset, so every bump in the woods and every mysterious shadow is a Sasquatch, when indeed that is not the case. Now, as for whether or not I actually believe that, yes, it's true in some cases. However, also you must consider that now that there's this film of it, people are starting to realize, I think anyway, that, hey, I'm not the only one who sees this. And so they become a little more open about their story. And then the media shoots them down for believing something ridiculous. It's really funny. Mankind has always existed with other apes. That there are creatures that we didn't know about that we know about today, like gorillas, the okapi, which is a giraffe-like creature in Africa. The Komodo dragon was often considered ridiculous until they actually found one. And the giant squid. People for the longest time scoffed when a sailor said that he had seen a giant squid. Well, nowadays we know they're real, and we know that there are bigger squid. So, I believe it's only a matter of time until I wouldn't have to talk about Sasquatch in this manner. But at any rate, we're at 3 minutes now. We're gonna go ahead and begin. The information in this video was pulled off the website BigfootHistory.com, which we found in the description. And also, I took notes. So if I look down, it's because I'm looking at my notes. But for several parts, I will be reading directly off the webpage because, well, I need to. It was important, but too much for me to write down. So I literally just decided we would read off the webpage. Give me a sec here. Alright. Now then, to begin with the reading. It's fairly interesting to look back on mankind's history and see that we've had these hairy men running around in the woods pretty much since we've been running around in our little civilizations. The earliest one in literature is called Enkidu, from the tale of Gilgamesh. Now, Gilgamesh in the story fought with Enkidu several times until, through their battles, they came to respect each other and became friends. Enkidu was mortally wounded, and Gilgamesh cried for his friend. who he referred to as a man rather than a man-beast or a beast. So then we go to the ancient historian Herodotus. He spoke of hairy monsters down in Libya, and the Greek and Romans called such creatures satyrs, or satyrs, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, which included creatures like the fauns, the sileni, and the nymphs. It's theorized that these might have been depictions of surviving hominid creatures. That's creatures that are related to humans. But not like chimpanzees, bonobos, orangutans, and gorillas. More along the lines of Australopithecines and Homo erectus. Don't you dare laugh at that. And those type of creatures. And then in medieval Europe, the creature was were described as hairy. They had human and animal traits. But since there are no official reports on them, as there are today, they may have just been myths and drunken tales. In 986, we have the first written account from North America, filed by Leif Erikson. He referred to the creatures as Skelring. He described them as ugly, hairy, swarthy, and they had big black eyes. Peter Byrne, in his book Search for Bigfoot, Monster, Myth, or Man, he says that Skelring means barbarian, so he may have been referring to Native Americans. However, he quickly points out, though, that Erikson referred to the creatures as hairy. Now, the Norse were rather hairy people. So you have to wonder, just how hairy were these things to be considered hairy by the Norse? Now then, Erikson was not the first person to report such a creature on the North American continent. Indeed, the native tribes have been referring to the creatures for years, all across the continent. They had names like Bookwas, Oma, Sasquatch, Stickmen, and Matlocks. Now we get to the first of the reports I have to read, written by Jose Mariano Mozino. I probably mispronounced that. He wrote in his book, Noticia de Nootka, published in Spanish in 1792, I do not know what to say about the Matlocks, or Sasquatch, inhabitant of the mountainous districts, of whom all have an unbelievable fear. They imagine his body as very monstrous, all covered with stiff black bristle, a head similar to a human one, but with greater, sharper, and stronger fangs than those of a bear, extremely long arms, and toes and fingers armed with long curved claws. His shouts alone, they say, force those who hear them to the ground, and any unfortunate body he slaps is broken in 1,000 pieces. The site then makes mention of another early report from settler David Thompson, who kept a daily journal as he crossed the Canadian Rockies. During one trip in the winter of 1811, he states an encounter where he came across what nowadays would perhaps be called Sasquatch tracks. This is what he wrote. Continuing our journey in the afternoon, we came on the track of a large animal, the snow about 6 inches deep on the ice. I measured it. 4 large toes of 4 inches in length, to each a short claw. The ball of the foot sunk 3 inches lower than the toes. The hinder part of the foot did not mark well. The length 14 inches by 8 inches in breadth. Walking from north to south, and having passed about 6 hours, we were in no humor to follow him. Its great size was not that of a bear. Then we come to the tale of one Paul Kane, who writes of the fear the natives had of this creature. I read, when we arrived at the mouth of the Catalpatal River, 26 miles from Vancouver, Washington, I stopped to make a sketch of the volcano, Mount St. Helens, distant, I suppose, about 30 or 40 miles. This mountain has never been visited by either whites or Indians. The latter assert that it is inhabited by a race of beings of different species, who are cannibals, and who they hold in great dread. These superstitions are taken from a man they say went into the mountains with another, and escaped the fate of his companion, who was eaten by the skookums, or evil genii. I offered a considerable bribe to any Indian who would accompany me in its exploration, but could not find one hardy enough to venture there. Now, it's worth noting here, he reports Sasquatch as cannibalistic. Several other stories include such tales, however, it is not a widely accepted story, unless you're in Hollywood. But it is not necessarily peaceful. There have been violent tales, and the next couple of stories are those. Even our President Theodore Roosevelt has one for you. We'll start with his. President Roosevelt was once hunting, and he heard the tale of two trappers. Their camp had been ransacked several times, and they suspected bears and raccoons. One night, they heard strange noises, and they were rather terrified. Their traps had been raided earlier in the day, and they felt it was time to leave. One of the hunters left to go retrieve the traps and anything still in them, while the other stayed at base camp. When the hunter who had left returned, he found his friend's maimed carcass. The creature was never found or identified. You can find more about this tale from in a link from the website. Then, in the 1890s, near the Chetco River, we have another rather horrific tale. And this one's not pleasant. A dozen loggers and their families encountered a great beast with disastrous results, the website says. They were camping in tents by the river, and every morning, their freshly cut timber and logs were scattered everywhere. And there were large human-like footprints. But they suspected that these were bears. And so they followed the tracks into the woods until they could not follow any longer. Later that night, the loggers were awakened by shrill screams of something not quite human in the near underbrush. Seizing a rifle, one man lit a torch and headed into the darkness. He was quickly followed by several others. Very quickly, the first man ran back into camp and collapsed in terror at the feet of his tracking companions. He babbled incoherently about a hairy monster 8 feet tall with yellow eyes, fangs, and hands like a man. The camp was then rather distressed. The next night, two men decided to track and kill the intruder. They carried a small lantern and loaded rifles and disappeared into the darkness behind the tents. Back in camp, their friends heard screams, then silence. When the two men did not reappear, the other loggers grabbed lanterns and torches and, while firing their guns into the air, set out in search of their comrades. Half a mile from camp, they found the scene of a desperate struggle. Broken and bleeding, arms and legs ripped from the torsos, their two friends lay scattered all over the place. They had been slammed against trees and torn in pieces by something with incredible strength. Blood dripped into small pools from branches high in the trees, as well as from the crushed greenery of the surrounding shrubs. But of the hairy creature responsible, there were only bloody footprints leading deep into the woods. End quote. As you can imagine, they packed up and left. Professional hunters came through the area, but could not find the creature. Skeptics will obviously not be satisfied until we have a body of such a creature. This was almost the case, though, in 1884, when near Yale, British Columbia, a strange creature was captured. Some called it Jacko, and believed to be a young member of the species. What became of this creature is unknown. It was being transported and disappeared, of course. There's a link in the article on the website to the story of Jacko. Now then, with the arrival of the 20th century, we get more encounters. In 1901, one Mark King, whose job it was to search out sites for good timber, and he's known for his reliability, he's a credible witness, was alone on Vancouver Island. His native packers would not accompany him, fearing what they called the monkey men. It was late afternoon when he sighted the man-beast, as he called it. It was over a pool washing some roots. Once it noticed him, it gave out a rather alarmed cry and then ran away into the hillside. King described the creature as, quote, covered with reddish-brown hair, and its arms were peculiarly long and were used freely in climbing and in brush running, while the trail showed a distinct human foot, but with phenomenally long and spreading toes. A dramatic event was reported in 1907. The captain of the steamship Capilano was sailing the British Columbian coast when he found himself being hailed by a canoe load of Indians, frantic to get away from their small community called Bishop's Cove. Apparently, a large wild man had been running around nearby at night, and they were so scared that they left their village in a hurry. No one believed them, of course. They found it to be quite amusing. But the natives would not return to that village. 1924 saw two of the most famous Sasquatch encounters, both of which are rather interesting. First is a kidnapping, the tale of Albert Osterman. The link to his story is in the website, but I've heard the story so many times I know it by heart. Albert Osterman was out prospecting, and as he was out sleeping one night, his camp had been ransacked numerous times what he thought were bear, so he was sleeping with his rifle in the sleeping bag, and should the bear come into his camp, he would attack it. However, he slept rather deeply one night. When he awoke, he had been carried off to a cave and was held hostage by several large, hairy men, is what he called them. Two big ones and two small ones, as he put it. So, parents and children. Ostman was held there for about a week, and what happened for him to get away was, it was just him and one of the larger ones, either the father or the mother, and he had some supplies with him in his camp, so in his sleeping bag, I mean, and so he was able to use those. And one night, or I should say one morning, he had some snuff, and he ate some of his chewing tobacco, and he was also preparing some coffee while he did it. And the creature took the snuff and ate the entire canister of snuff. Didn't like the taste of that, so grabbed the coffee, which was not fully brewed, and still really hot, and he drank it. And that didn't satisfy him either. So he ran off to go get some water. Ostman took off, taking only his rifle. Again, there's a link to Ostman's story in the website. Second case is a lot more violent. 4 miners were attacked in their log cabin by several rock-throwing ape creatures in the area of Washington called Ape Canyon. Gee, I wonder why you would encounter a Sasquatch in a place called Ape Canyon. Like Ostman, they were considered reliable witnesses, and not to be considered crazy. These men were terribly scarred. These were tough, rugged, seasoned miners, and they were pretty used to seeing death and being in rather dangerous situations. The link to the article about that is also on the website. That's it. There were many more encounters over the years. Things get interesting in 1950. A group of hikers, including one expert skier, Jim Carter, were exploring Ape Canyon. He was part of a 20-strong group from Seattle, and he disappeared. The parties couldn't find him. They did, however, find his tracks, and it showed he was running at a great speed, as if he was running away from something. He even jumped over great crevices. The party did also comment that they felt as though they were being watched the whole time, and they could feel the hair on the back of their neck standing up. As to what happened to him, 2 members of the party, Bob Lee and Dr. Otto, the surgeon for the Seattle Mountain Rescue Council, concluded that, quote, the apes got him. You can read the full article on the site. Another significant sighting was in 1955. William Rowe claimed to have seen a female Sasquatch near the town of Tetwancash in British Columbia. This case is significant because he remembers so much detail, and he even wrote a sworn affidavit in front of a commissioner of oaths. There's a link to that article on the site. However, things pick up about the late 1950s, early 1960s, when Bluff Creek in North California opened up for logging. And that's when we got the name Sasquatch. I mean, that's when the creature Sasquatch got the name Bigfoot. which I always considered an offensive term. But anyway, loggers would turn up on the site each morning to discover equipment had been moved, disturbed, and there were giant footprints everywhere. 50-gallon fuel drums were even tossed around as if they were empty. 20 miles of road had been built when the track started to appear. And they were made at night, at intervals of about a week. The basic route was across the road to get from the hillside to the creek bed. Sometimes they went for a short distance along the road, even circling the parked machines. Tracks were all the same individual and were roughly about 16 inches. I have no idea if that's about 16 inches. Hold on, I have a ruler or something around here. Here we go. Bigger than that. And this is 15, so it's not much bigger. Anyway, and they're also 8 inches wide. So from here to here wide. Right? Yeah, here to here wide. I'm sorry, I'm trying to angle it with the webcam. These footprints impressed about an inch deep. Which is pretty impressive. The logger boots only made a slight impression, so much that you probably wouldn't even have noticed it if you weren't looking for it. Foreman Jerry Crew said, "I've seen hundreds of these footprints in the past few weeks. Every morning we find his footprints in the fresh earth we've moved the day before." Crew made plaster casts of one of the tracks and took it to a local newspaper. Newspaper editor commented on it being a big foot and ran the story with the word Bigfoot used for the first time. Resulting news story was picked up by Associated Press wire, and Bigfoot was famous. And then 9 years later, at Bluff Creek, Roger Patterson and Bob Giblin came along trying to film a documentary trying to prove the existence of Sasquatch. Instead, they shot what they claimed was a female Sasquatch. And it's a rather interesting film to look at. There are tons of dissections of it. I don't feel the need to do one. I will just point out what I found interesting throughout them. Humans can replicate the creature's stride, however, it's not natural. The way the creature strides, its ankle and its knee are both bent. That's not natural for humans. And this causes the head to not bob. When humans walk, their heads tend to bob. This creature's head doesn't bob. You can see the muscles under the fur. And, again, this would have been a really hard costume to fake because of female anatomy. And it's pretty anatomically correct. So if it is a hoax, this is the greatest hoax of all time, without a doubt. There is a guy who claims to be the guy in the costume, and there are people who claim to have seen the costume, and Patterson and Giblin's families say they've seen the costumes too. But they're never able to produce the costume. Nor is the guy who shot the film, who claims to have been the creature they shot. What's interesting to note about his testimony is he's off by a couple hours at the time they claim to have been there, and at the time he claims to be there. There's roughly a several hour difference. I believe it was about 2 or 3 hours difference between when he said he was there and when they said they were there. Now, indeed, the only people who know the truth are Bob Giblin and Roger Patterson. Giblin claims it's true. Patterson went to his grave claiming it was true. And there's a link about the film on the site. This is when you divide historical Sasquatch and modern Sasquatch. Things are not the same. They haven't been the same and will most likely never will be again. It's really depressing, and I wish people could get back to what Sasquatch was. But the only way that's going to happen is if we actually prove its existence. In the 70s, it was used in minor television. He was an adversary to the $6 Million Man, and he was in countless TV commercials, such as, of course, Jack Link's Beef Jerky presents Messing with Sasquatch. If there's ever an advertisement for that in front of this video, that would be way too funny. And those commercials are funny. But it has its usual, the site calls them crankpots, stories in the tabloid press further reinforced the belief amongst most people that it was just all one big fun. Stories like "I was raped by the abominable snowman" were typical amongst headlines. And the hoaxers came. It was then that the phenomena remained in most people's minds just one big joke. They just don't understand it, and they ridicule the serious researchers. If you ever go camping, it's easy to see that there could be something hiding there, and a trained professional can go through, indeed several have, seen so much proof that this thing could be there. Food sources, hiding places. It's perfect. But, oh well. It seems that as soon as white people showed up on North America, it was destined to be screwed. Way to go, white people. Thus concludes the longest video in the history of this channel. The Sasquatch is a credible phenomenon, and it's just common sense. If you go out there, indeed several trained researchers have, and they have seen that there's pretty good places for it to hide, and it would probably fulfill the same area of the food chain as a bear, the overreigning omnivore. And we theorize it would eat pretty much the same stuff, maybe even tougher stuff such as bark and leaves and moss, which normal animals don't eat. Now, is North America the most likely place to discover a Sasquatch? I don't know. I'd say first we'd probably discover the Himalayan Yeti, the Chinese Yeren, the Indian Monde Baroon, and then the Sumatran Orang Pendek, then the Russian Almasty. Then I would say we'd probably discover the Sasquatch. However, I do believe that they're all going to happen, mind you. Then the Australian Yowie, then any of the South American creatures. What's funny is I don't think I've ever heard of a Sasquatch-type creature being reported in Africa. But please, if you do have one, please let me know in the comments section below. Now then, let's use this to discuss our different viewpoints. Let's keep it calm, people. And let's just talk Squatch. No name-calling. No insulting. Let's keep it respectful, people. We're trying to bring in respect and honor to this myth, to this mythology. Something it hasn't had in years. And so, with that, we end tonight's feature presentation. Goodbye.